Welcome back to the Open Hardware Miniconf. Next up, Nicola's there in the background. Next up is the man I wish I could be, Leon. On this side of me. Leon is also a regular at the Open Hardware Miniconf, and many of you will have seen a previous version of this project at a previous LCA. So Leon is going to be talking about hardware hacking for hugs and profit. He's the man that I wish we could hug in person, but we can't this year. So Leon, please tell us about your project.
Thank you very much. So, as John introduced, and thank you, I'm Leon Wright, DevOps engineer at Pet Circle. We're hiring. And let me see, I've got a few interests, but a lot of it relating to open hardware, in particular home automation, electronics, and I really love bridging the digital and physical worlds. And not only that, bringing a bit of whimsy into a world that can be quite challenging. And, well, I do love to hug people. And although this is about all I can do right now. So I wish I could hug you all. But for today, they'll be virtual. So let me tell you a bit about this project and its journey. But first, you might be thinking, why? It was late Tuesday night, LCA 2017, Hobart. It was in probably some of the best dorm accommodation I've stayed in to date. And I was sitting alone by myself. Because at the time, I was recovering from PTSD, which I mostly experienced as acute anxiety, which led to a bit of shyness and quite a lot of sensory overload. But I desperately wanted to talk to all the really cool people at the conference about open hardware. Now, once I was in conversations, I was, mostly fine. But even to this day, I still kind of find it hard to start conversations. I had a bunch of gear, and for the life of me, I can't recall, but I had a bright idea. That idea being, make my badge tell the internet I got a hug. Now, my first attempt involved shoving an ESP8266 through the holder, stabbing a bunch of holes in my fingers in the process. They've mostly recovered. And a sharp IR range sensor. Now, at the time, that IR range sensor was beyond my capabilities. I couldn't figure it out. I did, however, attend Alastair De Silva's Automate Your Home with MQTT tutorial, which came with a whole bunch of goodies. Now, quick tangent. When I was writing the initial code, I learned, whilst hugging a pillow in my dorm at 1 a.m., because waking up a delegate for a hug seemed like a bad idea at best, and probably a code of conduct violation at worst. Hugging becomes quite intimate, extremely fast, like between 700 and 1,000 milliseconds. So my lazy first attempt with a 5-second timeout required more thought. Anyway, after visiting LT at the front desk, who seemed quite perplexed at my request for an extra badge holder, I wired up a binary IR switch and a couple of free pixels from Freetronics, and version 1 was born. But it kind of lost its state every time I got a hug. So after bumping into Angus Grattan from Expressive, he was intrigued. So I brought up my GitHub repo on my phone and showed him. Can you see the hug? The hug? I talk a lot about hugs. Can you see the bug? I couldn't. After a bit of a skim, Angus noted I'd tripped up on a trap for young players. Turns out my last-minute code for my pretty lights was trying to iterate past the end of an array. And that corrupts your memory. One character changed later, and it was fixed. Hugs could continue. So I flashed that fix to the badge during the next talk. And whilst it was an extremely unreliable concept, it generated interactions with an ease I didn't even think was possible. Not only that, the energy and the people I encountered was overwhelming in the best kind of way. Sydney LCA 2018 rolled around. This time, hardware reliability was the plan. Expressive had recently released the ESP32, and I really wanted to play around with it. So I had a bunch of those and had purchased a bunch of VL6180X time of flight sensors. And the first iteration of my hug algorithm came to fruition. Along with that, the ESP32 dev boards often have charge controllers, which meant I could lose the USB power bank and cable in my pocket and carry a battery. Unfortunately, it worked a little bit too well. Fortunately, though, it wasn't a joyless person, rather an upset Twitter algorithm. My Twitter account did recover later that day after actually tweeting something other than hugs. Now, post-conference, I'd paid for a ticket to Brain Candy Live and sprung for the extra meet and greet package. So I got to meet Adam Savage and Michael Vsauce Stevens after the show, which was just an utterly incredible experience. Not only that, Adam was extremely interested in my batch, and he asked so many questions that I kind of felt guilty for holding up the line a bit. And yes, I did get a hug from both of them. Tweet Source first, and then Adam Savage, which was just epic. Now, LCA 2019 at Christchurch, packing to create this badge was getting serious. I'm still kind of surprised there weren't more questions asked by security about the amount of lipo cells in my carry-on for an international flight. I did check. I was under the max allowed, just. Construction was also getting pretty serious as well. I'd built myself a little extraction fan and brought a decent soldering iron. Well, I've got a better one now. And with not much I wanted to change on the hardware front, I wanted to address the infrastructure behind the badge. So with a good amount of AWS DevOps under my belt, what better opportunity than to over-engineer the bejesus out of this thing? So behind the badge sat an ECS cluster with 3 Docker containers, MQTT for message transport, the actual HugBot, and a badge heartbeat service, which was actually suggested during that conference by another delegate, because I kept looking down to see if it was actually working, and then I'd hug someone and it wouldn't go off, and he was like, "Why don't you add a heartbeat so you know your whole stack's working?" I'm like, "Wow, that's a fantastic idea," and implemented in about 10 minutes at the next talk. It also had a proper hug domain and Let's Encrypt SSL certificates. And I managed to add quality checking to my hug algorithm, which successfully prevented my account from being shadow banned. And for the shy huggers amongst us, I know who you are. It allowed them to game things to get a better score. There was quite frequently, they'd look at Twitter and go, I'm not happy with that. Can I hug you again? And I'm like, of course. Unfortunately, I wasn't very organized before the conference, and none of the sensors I ordered, and I ordered from about 7 eBay stores, arrived. So I had a lot of trouble with broken solder pads because I'd rescued a couple of spare sensors from previous badges. But It did last the entire conference until just after my lightning talk at 2019, where a final exuberant hug from Opal proved to be its undoing. LCA 2020 on the Gold Coast, I didn't quite get my badge built as quickly as I would have hoped. Between procrastinating my game's Minicom talk by redoing the entire DevOps for the badge, and then actually finishing the talk, it meant I had to leave quite a mess. And I was staying in accommodation that was to be cleaned in my absence. I thought it best to leave a note. Yeah, I can't see anything too dangerous there. I left all the batteries unplugged. That's usually a good idea. But maybe I can't say the same for the badge. It's a bit of a mess back there too. Now, I didn't take a lot of photos at LCA 20, last LCA, but all my sensors for LCA 2019 did eventually arrive. I still have enough for like 8 conferences. I also changed up the visual feedback. The heart on the previous badge was cool and all, but it didn't give people immediate feedback. They'd sort of like give me a hug and look at the heart and then try to extend, make it bigger. And, you know, by that stage, the hug was counted. Now, I was wondering if the LiPo was going to be enough for this little strip of LEDs. And, you know, after the first hug and their entire head glowed, I knew that I was onto a good concept. So beyond stabbing my fingers many times, what other problems have I had? Soldering breadboard wires through badges works great until you get a set that don't seem to take solder because they're made out of some crappy metal and you don't have any flux on you. People trying to fake a hug, although I did add invalid hug detection code to my algorithm. Building something for detecting hugs needs to be robust. People will try to get a high score by increasing the currently unmeasured squeeze factor. Badges don't really make great circuit boards unless they're actually circuit boards. You can carry 150 watts of spare batteries on an international flight, which is quite a few LiPo cells. And fortunately, no major fires. And, well, this leads me to maybe a bit more of a whimsical front. Continuation of the whimsical front, really. I've bought things like blower fans, built battery packs, made noise boxes, just so I could chase my friends around in a T-Rex suit that maintained optimal comical floppiness for up to 14 hours. Now, to the less whimsical, I've built sensors around my office for presence detection. IoT control for my former workplace's gate because I was sick of calling people to let me in. And by the time I left, pretty much everyone was using it. And it was still pretty much in that taped up state on the windowsill. No motion temperature sensors and mood lighting for my... Actually, that's probably mostly whimsical. Buying a lot of off-the-shelf Mirabella Genio lights and flashing them with Tasmoda so I could have control over my own devices in my own house. Building prototype sensor boards for my house to replace the old security system, which hadn't worked in years. And even contributing to Tasmoda to fix a broken driver. And with now, I've lost count of how many devices I've got connected to my IoT network. It's a lot. And even building my own custom circuit boards. And that pretty much worked first time, on my lab bench at least. I did get some connectors around the wrong way. And the voltage in my lab was different to the voltage in that board to the left. And it took me hours to figure out why that wasn't working, but I got there. And my current project is to add a PID controller to my coffee machine and connect it to my home automation, because it doesn't quite keep stable enough stable enough temperature to get optimum coffee extraction. And I kind of want to pre-warm it before I leave my desk, which is actually in my little office in a shed in my backyard. Now, at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned not being able to integrate with a sensor. And pictured was, up until the last couple of years, pretty much the extent of my gear. A soldering iron that I've had for nearly 20 years, and a DMM made in the late 70s my dad bought me when I was a kid, to now contributing to open source, compiling my own custom Tasmania-based firmware, and even designing and getting my own circuit boards manufactured. If socializing is a challenge for you, find something you're into and lean into it. There will be others intrigued, interested, or even into the same things. I also want to give a bit of a shout out to Opal for being my top code contributor, and metric-wise, likely my top hugger. Angus Grattan for taking the time to help me with my code, and Mark Wolf for helping me out when I2C seemed just beyond me. And all of you. Your interests helped me reconnect with a world that I'd long felt disconnected from. And last but not least, John and Andy and the rest of the Open Hardware team for giving me a chance to embellish in my whimsy. Also, always make sure you get your wiring correct, lest you, at 1 a.m., let the smoke out of your just completed badge. So, I'm Leon Wright. That's my talk on hacking hardware for hugs and profit. I hope you got something out of it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Leon. It's been really cool to see the development of this project over the last few years, and to get to test it out a few times in person.
Yeah, I look forward to testing it out again.
Yeah.
I have plans.
Yeah. There was a question from Adam, which is, it's my question as well, which is, how are this awesome and how do I become awesome like you?
Be yourself. You're already awesome.
Exactly. Katie just asked, can I have a hug? Unfortunately, that's not possible right now. So
there I hugged in.
So there was a question from Jenny, who asked, can I buy a hug detector or find instructions on making one somewhere? So that is a great question. If people want to do this sort of thing themselves, where can they look for more information?
So the source code and the project is on my GitHub page, Techman83, and it's called Being Hugged. The hardware design is not really design. It's kind of just me hacking it together at 1 o'clock in the morning. Yeah, and trying not to set my dorm on fire. But I do have plans to build something a bit more in advance of future conferences. So I have some ideas.
Okay. We're just about out of time, but just quickly, another question from Irving, which was, have you thought of adding NFC so two of these hug badges can tweet each other's names?
That's a fairly good idea. Well, no, a very good idea. I had people have suggested like recognition and stuff like that, but there's obviously privacy considerations. But if I had multiple hug badges out in the wild that could talk to each other.
Well, LCA 2022. Okay.
NFC might be a challenge because you've got to be like a bit more well aligned. But
Yes.
maybe some Bluetooth LE or something.
Potential. That's fantastic. Well, thank you very much, Leon. It's really cool to see the things that you've been building, and it's always great to have you involved in the Open Hardware MiniConf. So for
Awesome.
everybody else, we are going to a lunch break now, and we will be back after lunch with a session about the hardware of the Swag badge, and then we have a couple of really interesting projects to talk about. So hang around for the rest of the day. It'll be worth it, believe me. So thank you very much. Have a great lunch break, and we'll see you soon.